This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on PM Gati Shakti-National Master Plan for Infrastructure Development. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, Economic Analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR Correspondent.
Today we would discuss on the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti-National Master Plan for Infrastructure Development. And to understand this in some detail in terms of what the plan envisages and what the funding for the plan is and how it has been executed, I'm joined by Shri A.K. Bhattacharya. Mr. Bhattacharya, a warm welcome to you on the program.
Thank you.
For the benefit of the listeners to this program, do explain to us what this master plan is under the PM Gati Shakti program.
Well, as you know that the Gati Shakti program is primarily focused on making sure that the country's logistics system gets a big push and big boost. As you would know that the logistics cost in the Indian economy is still fairly high compared to all developing and developed economies. Now, this is considered to be as high as 15% of GDP or gross domestic product. Now, in most effective and developed markets, this cost is something around 8 to 9% of GDP. Now, the idea of Gati Shakti, and one of the major ideas of Gati Shakti is to bring down this cost of logistics from 15% of GDP to closer to 8 to 9% of GDP. Now, imagine the big advantage that the Indian economy will reap if your cost of logistics as a result of PM Gati Shakti comes down by a few percentage points of GDP over a period of time. Now, this will not only benefit Indian manufacturers, Indian producers and managers of infrastructure services, but also Indian exporters. And most importantly, India's economic growth should get a bigger boost because of productivity gains. So that is the background in which the idea of Gati Shakti was thought of. Now there are two elements in the Gati Shakti, which is that the Gati Shakti project is in a sense a segment of the government's larger infrastructure push, which is that the national infrastructure pipeline, which is expected to generate about 211 lakh crore of investments over the next 5 years, is part of that. Now, Gati Shakti is focused mainly on ports, on roads, railways, a little bit of energy, the airlines, waterways. Now, what they do is in PM Gati Shakti is it galvanizes and transforms the entire government approach by bringing together as many as 27 central government ministries under one institutional framework. Now that is a big advantage. Now instead of the users or implementers of these Gati Shakti projects, which is in roads and railways and waterways and ports and aviation, etc. Instead of going to all these different ministries to seek their permission, there is one digital online institutional framework through which all the permissions and implementation of projects can take place. And this is done through an empowered group of secretaries who decide on awarding the projects, deciding on what needs to be done. So these are the two major advantages of the PM Gati Shakti, which will create a big push for India's infrastructure game and ambitions, which to be realized for sustaining India's economic growth in the years to come.
AKB, you spoke about the master plan, which is directed at infrastructure, primarily to improve logistics in the country. Now, could you tell us about the specific investment in terms of funding this plan? What is the means by which it is being done? Is it out of the consolidated fund of India, or is it as a result of selling bonds to the public, or are we seeing private investment in it as well through special purpose vehicles?
It's a very important question you have raised. There are at least two clear, well-publicized ways of how the Gati Shakti plan has been implemented. The number one is, as you would have seen in the last budget, the government has raised its investment in capital expenditure for infrastructure projects by almost around 33% to around 10 lakh crore in the current year. Now, the bulk of this money will go into creating infrastructure projects on the government sector and with the public-private partnership with the government's contribution there. And this will also be forming part of the PM Gati Shakti project. And the second source of revenue for this would be a large number of public sector enterprises which are already operational in various Gati Shakti sectors like road, railways and ports. Now they have their own retained earnings, their own reserves, and they are going to bring in their own capital, own money, and that I understand is around 4.5 lakh crore, their money they will bring in to pump into these sectors. And the third will be the public-private partnership projects where the private companies will be joining hands with government agencies or state-owned enterprises to implement these projects. Just to give you a brief idea of what these projects mean is that, for example, on the roads, now there is a plan to build around 2 lakh kilometers long national highways in the country by 2025. Something similar has been planned for the Railways Ministry, where the cargo capacity will have to be raised to 1,600 million tons of cargo handling capacity. Right now, it is around 1,200 million tons or so. Something similar has been done with the Ministry of Civil Aviation, where the target is to create capacity for handling more passengers and cargo, and the number of airports to be created under this Gati Shakti project is 220 in the next 3 years. Something similar has been done for the ports. I can go on, but just to give you a sense of the grandness of this scheme or the magnitude of the project's ambition, this is a really, really major ambitious project that the government has planned under Gati Shakti.
Under the PM Gati Shakti plan, clearly new assets are being developed. You mentioned about ports, airports, railway terminals and hubs, and of course massive roadway projects which will benefit logistics. With these new assets being created, what is the business model in terms of earning from these projects? Who has ownership of these projects? Is it shared or is it completely owned by the government of India because they're responsible for developing it in the first place?
Some of these projects are going to be owned by the government of India and run by them. Some of these projects, like many of the airports, are going to be in the public-private partnership mode. In other words, Airports Authority of India will be joining hands with the private sector. In some cases, there are private sector operators who will come and set up these airports. In the railways, the cargo handling capacity, which is going up to 1,600 million tons, it will be achieved through the Indian Railways, and they have got the project outlay prepared already. But there are sectors, particularly the road sector, where the revenue stream is a little different, where you are going to see the construction of these highways through different forms and through different concessional models, where after they're constructed, it will be handed over to the private sector operator who will be tolling the roads, and the revenues will be shared between the company that built the road and the company that is operating the toll roads. So it's a mix of models. The idea is to create sustainable infrastructure, to make sure that the infrastructure that you create is used, remains efficient, and adds to economic efficiencies and productivity gains for the Indian economy.
So in terms of assessing this governance model, what is the fiscal cost to the government? Are we in deficit? How have we managed it? Because there's clearly a great deal of investment into it.
Oh, absolutely. I think there are fiscal costs of the Gati Shakti project. But as I told you earlier, that the government has been ramping up its capital expenditure program. In the last 3 years, they have gone up from around 4.5 lakh crore to 7.5 lakh crore last year to 10 lakh crore in the current year. So there is a rapid expansion in the government's capital expenditure program. And you must remember that but for this huge increase in the capital expenditure program, the government's fiscal deficit probably would have been a little less than what the government is planning, which is around 5.9% of GDP for the current year. This could have been less than 5.9% if the government had not planned to ambitiously raise its capital expenditure program aimed at boosting Gati Shakti or infrastructure projects. So therefore, there is a fiscal cost, but there is also a calculation behind the kind of gains that the economy makes, and therefore the fiscal costs incurred today should result in economic gains and the country's GDP benefiting not just from a higher size of the economy, but also from a more productive and more efficient economy.
How are the controls and incentives being designed to ensure that all the stakeholders fully comply with their obligations? We have seen infrastructure projects, especially under the previous government, stalled because of roadblocks. How is it that the control and incentive mechanism has worked this time?
As I told you that in the Gati Shakti, there is one institutional framework that has been created which has got representation from 27 different ministries, and they are in charge of it. It is headed by cabinet secretary level officer. So it is being monitored at a very highest level. And therefore, it is this committee that will make sure that the projects are planned, investable resources are allocated to them, and delays are avoided. And when they're implemented, they become sustainable pieces of infrastructure. One very important element in this entire Gati Shakti project, which I must draw your attention to, is the manner in which the principle of involving the states have been kept in mind. Now, the principles of involving the states is evident from the manner in which the government is spending a portion of its total capital expenditure under infrastructure through the states. Now, 2 years ago, the center would only provide around 10,000 crore to the states for boosting infrastructure projects in their areas. Last year, it went up to almost around 1 lakh crore. And the current year, the center government plans to offer the states 1.3 lakh crore out of 10 lakh crore, which means that the states are being brought in and there is a linkage to condition to be fulfilled for following reforms and making sure that the prudent policies of project investments are followed, so that the states also are encouraged to come up with new infrastructure projects so that the whole country gains by way of infrastructure benefits.
AKB, another challenge that has been part of infrastructure building, we've seen that in the US, is cost overruns, not just because of delay, but also because of inflation. Building materials have gone up, including steel and other material like cement, which is crucial for infrastructure. How has PM Gati Shakti plan managed to control it so that it is within budget?
It's an important point that you have raised. Cost overruns in long gestation infrastructure projects is a serious challenge. In the past, as you rightly pointed out, infrastructure projects have seen delays and as a result, cost escalation, which means a kind of a tax on the taxpayers of this country. So what this Gati Shakti project aims to achieve is to reduce the possibility of such delays through this online framework of an institutional framework by which all necessary clearances are granted in one place, and then their implementation is monitored through that same institutional framework. Now, these are early days, and the jury is still out what happens maybe 3 years or 4 years later, whether the government has been able to implement those projects on time, on schedule. But it looks to me that a framework has been created to prevent such cost overruns and delays, because these delays, as I said, are a major challenge and a tax on society.
So clearly, procurement is also on track when it comes to the PM Gati Shakti-National Master Plan and to execute it.
Procurement is certainly one of the many goals that single institutional framework monitors, because just as inflation can be a problem in a delayed project, procurement can also go up if there are delays. So the important thing is not to worry about inflation, but to worry about delays, both in procurement as well as in execution of projects. So once you avoid delays in procurement as well as execution, you are likely to be less adversely affected by the general pace of inflation than you would be if your projects are delayed or there are procurement delays.
Thank you so much, AKB, for discussing at length and in technical detail the PM Gati Shakti-National Master Plan for Infrastructure Development and what's really underlying the success of it.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan for Infrastructure Development. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, Economic Analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official.